new Stormworks DLC dropped, Space, and you know I'm all about that, so I figured I would talk about it. I've seen some videos covering things like, oh, there's these modules and stuff like that, but I haven't seen anybody do a deep dive into how rockets and gas actually work in Stormworks. So I'm going to do that for you. This is the easiest kind of vehicle to make. Rockets are easier to make than cars. They're easier to make than boats. And they're definitely easier to make than planes. Rockets are not rocket science. There just are a few things that you have to understand about how they work. This is a rocket. This rocket can actually get us all the way to the moon. But if you've ever seen any rockets in Stormworks, you're probably thinking, where's the rest of the rocket? Where are the giant fuel tanks? What is this? So here's the secret. These rocket engines have internal fuel tanks. And what I've done is I have hyper-compressed fuel into the rocket itself at 999 atmospheres. This one little engine has 3.5 tanks of hydrogen and half that much oxygen, because that's the ratio at which it burns. So this is 3.5 and 1.7. An enormous amount of fuel is baked right into this liquid fuel rocket. I don't need any other tanks, not to get to the moon. Now, I'm not going to take us all the way to the moon because it requires actually paying attention to your throttle and stuff. And instead, what I want to do is just show you how it works. So I'm just going to take us into space. Now right now I'm running at 215 meters per second. I can ramp that up by increasing our throttle a little bit, but of course running at this throttle we will burn through all of our fuel very rapidly. In space we could cruise along at 800 meters a second or so without spending too much. We could be at 0.1 throttle and still be going that speed, but in the soup, you're going to burn through a lot of your fuel if you try and push through it like this. Still, as you can see, pretty good for something with no tanks at all, right? Now we did run out of fuel because I was burning it at max speed, but we got all the way up here. And yes, if you take it more slowly, you can get all the way to the moon with this rocket. So, let's talk about the mechanics of how this works. The thing you have to understand about these rocket engines is they have an internal fuel tank setup. Whatever fuel you've got on your rocket doesn't matter to them. All that matters to them is the fuel in their internal tanks. When you tell them they're at 0.3 throttle and you tell them to ignite, what that means is to burn at 0.3 of whatever your maximum is using the fuel in your tanks. So you never need to worry that you are putting too much fuel in the rocket. Your rocket should always have all of the fuel, because that's how it's optimally used. That's how it works. So just keep your fuel lines open all the time. It's that simple. So even if this did have tanks, those tanks wouldn't have any kind of complicated valve setup. I would literally just be dumping all of the stuff from those tanks into the rocket as soon as the rocket wants it. I'd just be leaving an open line, and that would work fine. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that by default, these gas pressure tanks start at 97 or so atmospheres. So one of these gas tanks, huge, is 100 atmospheres of pressure, or just about 100 atmospheres of pressure, with whatever capacity they happen to, normally stick to, which it looks like is 3,515 liters. So, they come in at just under 100 times that much. I consider that to be a unit, right? So 100 atmospheres of a huge gas tank is 1 unit. And maybe you're wondering why I think like that. I mean, aren't you going to just attach these gas tanks to your ship and go? No, you never want these tanks on your rocket. Unless you're doing really, really tiny rockets, you do not want to use these prefab tanks. There's a couple of reasons for that, and I'm going to show that to you right now. Let's go ahead and just attach a manual valve here, and then a tank. Is this the hydrogen side or the oxygen side? This is the hydrogen side, so we'll go ahead and flip that to hydrogen. And then we'll spawn it, and we'll go and take a peek at how that works. Boop. So as you can see, this is 350,000 liters of hydrogen at just under 100 atmospheres. But once I open up the valve to these massive pump racks, the pressure starts to climb. Now, as far as I can tell, the pressure maxes out at 999.97 atmospheres, which means that one of these large gas tanks, one of these huge gas tanks, can actually contain 10 huge gas tanks worth of gas. But you have to actually do it. You have to actually pump that gas into it. You can't start it at max pressure. That's why every single rocket you ever build is going to have a pump station attached to it, which is what these are. This is just a pump station. Massively parallel pumping like this is by far the most efficient. Impeller pumps are nice because they have no maximum. So if you were to use electrical pumps, there is a maximum cap on how effective they can be, and you probably won't be able to get your gas tanks above maybe 400 atmospheres. Feel free to try it out. Impellers are much more forgiving, and you can get an impeller to pump you to 999 atmospheres in a nanosecond, because they will just peg all the way to maximum. Now, I'm using a glitch engine to do this. You do not have to use a glitch engine if you don't want to. You can do the same thing with just a bank of batteries and a large engine. So, experiment around to find a pump station that works for you, but remember that these massively parallel approaches are the most efficient. You might notice, however, it took an awful long time to get this gas tank filled up. It's still not quite full. Now, the reason for that is because there is a maximum throughput on a single pipe. One pipe can't actually have that much gas moving through it every nanosecond. I think it's a soft cap, but it's definitely a cap. So that means that these tanks, with their one intake, can only be filled so fast because they've only got one pipe going into them. We're going real slow now. So that means that we almost never want to use these tanks as targets because they only have one intake. Now, that's true of our rocket engine as well, but the tanks there were so small it didn't really matter. If we were going to try and go to the moon with an actual load, we wouldn't want to have the players sit here for 2 or 3 minutes waiting for these pressure tanks to charge before they, launch. We need something that can take more than one pipe. We need something that we can massively parallel pump into. And of course, there are a couple of options for that. One option is everybody's favorite, the old actual fluid tanks. Problem is, these things are minuscule. These are so tiny. So yes, they have 2 inputs, which is twice as much input, but they are way too small to be useful to us. There also may be some kind of mechanic where they either leak or have a low maximum pressure. I haven't really looked into it, but they're not as performant as actual gas tanks are. But there's no reason to use them either. The only gas tank you actually need is the one you make yourself. If you create a box, this is a gas tank. Now, the reason most people don't want to do this is because you can't tell it to be full of hydrogen. There's no special spawner that I can put in there to say put in 100 atmospheres of hydrogen or whatever. I've got to pump it in. But we already have to pump. That's the downside of rockets, right? Everything on a rocket is super simple except for the initial phase where you actually have to fill it up. The good news is these can be filled up very, very rapidly because you can simply use as many intakes as you want. Just put filters on the inside, because this is full of gas despite it being called a liquid fuel engine. And then we can have, intakes from each of these individual elements. Put one right there just for speed here. Oh, I accidentally overshot. That's fine. You see what just happened there is I accidentally put in piping all the way through the tank for no reason at all, just because of how it drags. So by breaking it up into several different lines, I can bring in each of those lines individually. Turn off mirroring here. And we will get 7 times, 8 times, however many holes we've got. That's our maximum throughput improved. So if we wanted to power up our rocket to Mars or launch something super heavy or whatever, we could simply use a custom fuel tank just like this. And then by having a lot of fuel intakes, a lot of inputs, we can pump in as much fuel as we want, as rapidly as we want. Is that all of them? I think that is. Yeah, there's only... Oh, there's one bank missing here. I guess it doesn't matter. Oh, no, I just am an idiot. So, since that now pumps 5 times faster, we're going to get 5 times as much fuel in the same amount of time. Oh, but I didn't put an air filter. I didn't put an air checker on it because I'm a fool. So we'll go ahead and put a gas meter on it. Paint it red so we can see it. And of course, if this was on a rocket, we would do the exact same thing using hard points or hoses, whatever we prefer. You can see that this has a ton of hydrogen in it now. It has 20 million, 21 million units of hydrogen and going up. These have all dropped precipitously down to 1/3 of their total tankage. So that means by the time it took us to run over here, all of these tanks have transferred 66% of their contents into this tiny little box. And that's because of this massively parallel throughput. We could double that again by breaking it out into every individual pump. So that is the secret of rockets. Hyper-compressed fuel. It's just that easy. So use custom tanks and use a compressor like this that will put in as much fuel as you can. Now, if you don't want to max this out at 999 atmospheres, that's fine. Even at 100 atmospheres, the default for tanks, this is still more efficient than these. So you're going to want to use your custom tanks and pump them in. It's the only thing about this that you have to actually do. Do not fear the need to pump. Just accept it and learn how to do it. That's it. Have a great time. Bye.